Good evening and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're here today to talk about the Poweron's new AOVPN reporting solution, and I'm joined by my good friend, Richard Hicks. Welcome, and thank you for coming along.
How's it going, Leo? Thanks for inviting me, and I'm super excited about this solution. People have been asking for it for many years, and so I'm excited to share it with folks. I'm glad it's finally gotten to that point where we can do that, and yeah, it should be a good session.
Yeah, it's certainly been a bit of a long road to get here, but we're very excited that it's now out and generally available, and we're really excited to hear people's feedback.
Mm-hmm.
So today we're the agenda is kind of around introducing the solution to people who may not have seen or heard of it before, the what it is, the why it exists, all of that kind of thing. We'll then go into a bit of a live demo, take you through the whole report, and then kind of finish off with kind of summarising the benefits and the use cases for the solution, and have a bit of a Q&A at the end. So speaking of the Q&A, please do get your questions into the chat. Obviously, we'll try and cover as many as possible during the session if they're relevant, but if not, we'll have a look over and answer them at the end. And don't feel like you need to restrict yourself just to the AOVPN reporting solution. Feel free to ask any questions around either DBC or AOVPN in general as well, and we'll try and do our best to help folks out. So starting off, it's probably worth talking about the why and the how this came to be. So this is something that we've both had customers breaking down our door, asking us like, is that it? When we show them the built-in systems, isn't it?
Absolutely. So, with regards to this solution, it's been a pain point for always-on VPN administrators, and honestly, going back to the direct access days, where with direct access, we had a little bit better because we could see multiple servers in a cluster or multi-site or a combination of both in a single management console, although the view was somewhat limited. As we've kind of pivoted and moved on to always-on VPN, and we're implementing RAS and routing and remote access, the real challenge there is that we deploy 2 servers or 200. None of them talk to each other. None of them are aware of each other's existence. They share no information, data, or state, and so they're all very siloed. So anytime you have to run a report, like especially I think the most painful is like a user activity report, right? I need to know where this user went on this specific day and time or whatever, or during this date range. And at the end of the day, trying to find that is like trying to find a needle in the haystack sometimes. So having all of this information aggregated in a centralized location across all of your estate of RAS servers is going to be just tremendously beneficial. And as you'll see on the call today, folks, having the visibility and insight into current resource utilization, health status, and configuration. We're going to go through some demos later to show you some use cases around that. I think you'll find that it's going to be quite compelling.
Yeah. So effectively what we've been trying to do is consolidate all of the information from all of the different servers into a single easy to use report, and we've based our solution on Power BI. So what you can see here is the kind of the opening overview summary screen, and we'll show you the kind of the other views later on. But effectively, the architecture of the solution is that we, because of the limitations within kind of built into the routing and remote access solution, we can only actually access the key data that the VPN service provides locally on the host, because of the way that it uses the Windows internal database, which restricts remote access. So we have to have an agent on each of the machines. And then from there, what they do is they upload into a storage account. So that storage account is dedicated, or typically dedicated for the purposes of the solution. During the installation of the solution, we would look for the customer to provide a blob storage account hosted in Azure that we can then point both the reports for reading to and also the agents in terms of the upload to.
Indeed, yeah, and it is hosted in Azure in the UK, and in the US it's hosted in Azure. Good times. Yeah, outstanding. So it's important to understand that it is agent-based, right? So we're going to install a software component on each of the routing and remote access servers. And in that scenario, and by the way, Server Core is supported. Thank you for that, Leo. For those who know me, they know I'm a huge advocate of Server Core. In that scenario, we can install the agent and install silently. We need to import some settings from the registry or a group policy, and then after that, we're off to the races. This is going to start pushing data into the storage account, and then the Power On reports are going to run their magic, and you'll be able to see all kinds of cool stuff. And we're going to show you that here shortly.
Yeah. So it's probably just worth mentioning some of the other key considerations around this solution. The number one of those being kind of data latency. This is not a real-time solution, primarily, well, both because of the amount of work involved in terms of the agent exporting the data set, but also because we're operating on the Power BI framework. Most organizations are limited to 8 refreshes, automated refreshes a day on that data set. Now you can configure those 8, so what you would typically do is maybe run them between like 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. on an hourly basis, or if you're running kind of 24/7, maybe every 3 hours or something, depending on your organization and the size, etc. And to kind of match into that, the agent defaults to every 1 hour uploads into or its data set, although that can be configured to be dropped lower should you wish to.
Sure. And in my discussions with your engineers earlier in the testing, they had indicated that it wasn't really advantageous to do that more rapidly, and is that because of the limitations of the data refresh in Power BI and Azure?
Yeah, mostly that is ultimately you're putting every time you do a data refresh, it does a full export of the database, and then it goes round and queries a bunch of WMI classes and all those kinds of things. So it shouldn't put a huge amount of load on your routing your RAS servers, but obviously doing that every minute or every couple of minutes, you're putting a bunch of excessive data or throughput in there, and you're getting very little value out of that. Because the only thing you're really going to get out of that is the more granular metrics on the CPU and memory side of things, which are of kind of questionable value at that kind of scale.
Good to know. Good to know.
The other thing to just probably call out is that because we are built on top of the Power BI framework and system, customers will need their own Power BI licensing as well as the licensing to the AOVPN solution. Now, if you have got Microsoft 365 E5 or Office 365 E5 SKUs, that does include the Power BI Pro license in that kind of meta license. But if not, then the users of the report will potentially need to have their own separate licensing. And then also, as we previously mentioned, at this point, you would need your own customer managed Azure storage account as well.
Fantastic.
So a little bit on kind of purchasing. The way that an initial deployment will go is we'd have a small amount of time. That's typically half a day or a day's worth of consultancy just to help the organizations kind of set up the storage accounts and set up the agents and make sure that everything's working and the data's flowing through. And then the actual usage of the report is done on an ongoing subscription, yearly subscription basis, and that's based on the number of active RAS servers or VPN servers. So it's not done on any kind of concurrent user figures, and it's not done on any of your MPS or Radius servers, anything like that. And if you want to, then we can also offer multiple years up front, depending on customers' purchasing and billing and all of those kind of requirements. So now on to the exciting bit of the demo.
Outstanding. Yeah, super excited to share this with everybody. Let me share my screen here and find the right screen to share, of course. Outstanding. All right, so here we are. We're at this point, we're on the landing page for the Power BI app. And just to kind of recap, what we have done is we have VPN servers running Windows Server routing and remote access in our environment. I have 5 of them deployed in my test lab here. And we've installed the agent, configured the agent, and so those servers are now talking to Azure, uploading their data to storage. I've installed the Power BI app from Power On Platforms, and now I'm here on my landing page. I've imported my data. There's a bit of work you have to do to get that done. But once you get here, this is your landing page, and this is kind of the overview, the 10,000-foot level view of your platform or of your implementation. So I'm going to call your attention to a couple of things here. So in the VPN server configuration overview, you'll see you just get a nice general overview of things like, your server health status and the connectivity. This is critically important here is the addressing status. If you run out of IP addresses, it's not going to be a happy day for your clients. And so this gives you an idea if we're having any issues with that, especially if you're using DHCP. If there's problems there, they will show up. If there's any issues with services, you'll know about that. And then finally, a couple more things here. This is our basically our available spare connections, or the percentage of spare connections that are available. In other words, this is really helpful from a capacity planning standpoint and a resource utilization standpoint to understand, at what capacity is this? If this is, obviously, I don't have a lot of clients in my test lab here, and I have 6 servers, or 5 servers. But in a real environment, this would look very much different. And when you start to see these pushing 20 and 10%, that gives you the insight to be able to add additional resources. Maybe that's provisioning more CPU and memory to handle the increased number of ports, maybe increasing the size of your address pools and so forth. Also, and I think this is the bane of always-on VPN administrators everywhere, is certificate health status. So certificates are the #1 source of outage for always-on VPN customers. I will get at least 1 to 2 almost every week for a customer who's having an outage, who's had an expired certificate because they weren't monitoring or managing that. Now with this solution, no excuses. You'll be able to come in here and see that all of our certificates are healthy, and we can actually drill down a little bit more and get granular too, and we'll take a look at that here in just a bit. So we have some additional information here about our client connections, the current connections per server. This is really helpful just to get an idea of what the utilization is. You don't want to be caught, blind and not have enough resources to support the number of users you expect. And so all of this is really good. High level stuff about the number of maximum current connections that you're seeing, active connections, and importantly the available connections. Anytime these numbers are pushing down towards the low double digits, or even maybe triple digits, depending on how large your organization is, you probably want to take a look at that and address that very quickly. Next, I want to take you to the server overview. And let me switch to the server overview section. And now we're basically drilling down. We're getting a little bit more granular here. And now we take a look at each of the individual VPN servers, and we see some of the information we saw in the previous page, but we're going to get a little more granular, and then we're going to take a look at things like our SSL certificate health status. So once again, certificates are always a pain point, and it's a real blind spot for many organizations. Having the ability to see that your certificates are all healthy, and if they're not, you can proactively address those. Also, the number of available connections is critical. We always want to make sure that we have plenty of available connections, and if you see these pushing down towards the lower end of the range, towards zero, then we can jump on there and take some action to remedy that. This also is a number of active connections, and this is helpful from a client distribution standpoint. Many organizations with multiple servers are using, DNS round robin or Azure Traffic Manager or some other sort of global server load balancer or GSLB solution. Might even actually be using a load balancer like an F5, a Kemp, a Netscaler, any other platform. And if there are issues with load balancing configuration, we may see servers with no or few connections. We might see servers that have, way more connections than we're anticipating, and we can investigate as to why we don't see an even distribution or a more even distribution of client connections. One of the other things that I really like about this solution in terms of visibility is not only certificates. By the way, certificates are probably number one. I think having a view into your certificate health is probably going to be the biggest lifesaver. The second one will be configuration. So a lot of times when you're deploying multiple servers, it's easy to overlook a configuration. And this has happened to me more than once, where I've had a customer with some strange problems where it presents itself as some users occasionally when they connect will have performance issues, but other times not, and from the same location at the same time doing the same types of things. And so an investigation will reveal misconfigured servers, and you can see that very easily and readily here. So for example, you'll see that I have 5 servers listed in this particular array, and all of them have 4 CPUs and 8 gig of RAM, with the exception of this last one. And again, this is intentional. This is for the demonstration. But bottom line is we have one server that fell through the cracks and somehow only got 2 CPUs and 4 gig of RAM. And so it's running healthy. Everything else looks great. But now this allows me to look at this and go, hey, all of my servers should have 8 gig of RAM. Why is this server different? We can address that. And by the way, this happens time and time again, where a different group provisions servers, they have a document that says I need 4 CPUs, 8 gig of RAM, 80 gig disk, blah, blah, blah. And they're going through and deploying templates, and they misconfigure one or they forget to change it. And when you're doing a bunch of them, that can happen very, very easily. So this is a fantastic tool to monitor configuration and ensure compliance for all of your VPN servers and make sure that they are at full capacity. We also have information about the reporting disk database. The inbox accounting database is a SQL database, and that's where all of this data is stored on each individual server, and then the Power On Platforms agent pushes that to the Azure storage. The reporting disk, however, the size of that disk and the available free space is crucial because it's a SQL database. It's going to grow over time. Now, typically we have, I think by default, the data retention is like 1 year. And for most organizations, that's not a big deal. But the real challenge here is that by default, the reporting disk is on the C drive. Now, if you are, if you're provisioning your C drives, generously, 80, 100, 120 gig, maybe even more, perhaps not going to be a problem, but in a very, very busy environment, it certainly could be. But also, if you're thin provisioning, if you are provisioning like with 20 or 30 gig, trying to get away with the minimum, then this could be problematic, and the size of that disk could be a challenge. By the way, I do have tools available. If you're interested, you can reach out to me on this. I do have tools available that allow you to move the reporting database to a separate volume. And so I have customers that have very busy servers that want longer retention times and can't do that on the system partition. And so we'll move that off to another volume. Also, there are performance gains to be had there as well. So ideally, if you have a scenario where that's important, we can certainly address those. So here's our disk space or disk space utilization, the percentage of utilization. And so we want to make sure that we monitor this very carefully. The size of the database, the free disk space, the size of the database are all crucial to ensuring that the reporting database is healthy, has plenty of free space, and then we don't run into any issues there. Next, I want to talk about port configuration. This is another often overlooked scenario where you can really run into some problems. Again, you can see the number of IKE v2 ports that I have provisioned here is 500, and I've done the same for my SSTP ports, but you will also notice one thing here. Configuration stray, this server only has 128 SSTP ports. So what ends up happening is we put this into production. We're expecting each server to have plenty of ports available, and all of a sudden users when they start connecting to this individual server, start having problems and they can't establish that connection. By the way, the load balancer will see this server is perfectly healthy. The health checks pass, so it's going to route traffic to this server. So this is another way to find misconfigurations. And by the way, this is a really common misconfiguration, because when you are making the change from the default settings, the default's like 128 ports. Anytime you go above 128 ports, you must restart the server, not the services, but you must restart the server. And if you change this setting without restarting, or excuse me, if you change the setting and then try to change some other settings too, and then reboot later, one of these will get missed. It's very easy to miss this. So this is a really common configuration change. Misconfiguration, I should say. And then, of course, we have our certificate expiry, and it shows us the dates that all of our certificates expire. So those of you running routing and remote access in your environment, always on VPN with this solution, have no excuses. You'll know exactly when they're going to expire, and you can address them accordingly. Your IKE v2 certificates probably take care of themselves if your servers are domain joined, but your TLS certificates are usually from a public CA, so you do have to mind these, and that gives you that information as well. And then finally, uptime. This is really helpful because you can see how long these servers have been up. One of the things that that you can do when you're referencing this is that you can see I have a server here that was up for a much shorter duration. That's unusual. Maybe I want to investigate that. Maybe there was a crash. Maybe somebody rebooted. And as Leo pointed out on the previous call, another scenario in which you might want to pay careful attention here is if you see the uptime past more than about 30 or 40 days. If you see an uptime on a server of maybe 4 months, good bet it's not getting any updates, and it probably needs to be updated and rebooted. So all good stuff. And again, at the bottom, our current usage is more usage statistics on the number of ports and active connections and so forth. So on the VPN server configuration page, we're going to, again, just get a little more granular on some of our settings and configuration. You can see I don't have any counting servers here, but if I did, they would be listed here much like they are in the section here for our authentication servers. So authentication and accounting are essentially our radius servers, and you'll see that how I've got all these servers here configured. And then critically, as I'd mentioned before, IP addressing is rather important. If your clients connect and you have enough ports provisioned, but you don't have enough corresponding IP addresses, you're going to have problems. Clients won't be able to connect. And so this allows us to monitor the pool of available addresses per server. Now, this is a pre-release or preview version of Power On reporting, and there's actually a small bug, and it's actually, I think it's been fixed, but you'll see I have multiple servers listed as VPN1. That's a bug that's going to get addressed. But anyway, you can see here, if I scroll down a little bit, you can see that VPN2 has a pool, VPN3 has a pool, and so forth. And this does allow me to look at the number of ports, IKE v2 and SSTP, to ensure that I have enough provisioned, and then I can see also in terms of my available connections and my ports allocated, I can keep an eye, I can keep a close eye on how well this server is doing in terms of capacity. If it has enough reserve capacity, if it's getting low, I can make adjustments to that, scale out or scale up as appropriate. And then, of course, our VPN server health certificate health. Again, certificate health, really critical. Here is the status of all my servers. They are healthy. It tells me who the issuer is and who the subject is. So that's good information to know as well. And then finally, in this last section here in the server information, I have all of our servers are listed, the domain that they're joined to, if they're joined, server name builds and so forth. Where this might be helpful is if you're doing some upgrades and you find that you're still running an old 2016 server, it would show up here and you would know, hey, maybe it's time to upgrade this server. So again, really helps kind of keep your configuration consistent and uniform. So on the server performance tab, and this is interesting because not only does Power On reporting collect usage data and user activity from the database, but it's also collecting configuration and performance statistics and uploading them so that we can get an idea of what those look like over time. So we can do some trending analysis here, and this is really helpful for forecasting future capacity requirements. So if we are onboarding more and more users and we're seeing our processor time continuously climb, then we might know that, hey, you know what, this is trending upward, we need to address this, and we can add capacity, scale out, scale up as you wish. By the way, you'll notice that this is across all servers. I can always drill down into individual servers and get a look at a specific server. I can also move the sliders here for the time, and I can actually increase or decrease the time in which I want to look at traffic for this very specific server. So I'm going to go clear that. So I have the ability to look at a processor time, memory utilization. Again, if either of these are consistently trending upward, it allows you time to be able to make those configuration changes prior to an outage, running out of resources and so forth. Same thing with disk free space. Reporting drive space. If you see these trending upward consistently and not plateauing, then you'll know, hey, this is something that's going to need to be addressed. So ideally, keeping an eye on these reports is going to allow you, the always on VPN administrator, to be out in front of any issues and avoid any potential outages that are caused by unforeseen resource utilization or capacity constraints. So in terms of connection history, this is a good one as well. Again, really helpful for capacity planning and forecasting. This gives us an idea of how many concurrent connections we see by server. Now, unfortunately, this is a test lab. I had to round up every last VM that I had that had always on VPN provision to get this 11 count up here. But in a real environment, this will be much busier and much more dynamic. But at the end of the day, you can get an idea of how heavily utilized your servers are. And by scrolling in and scrolling out, you can see, different time slices for that. And of course, if you zoom all the way out, this is a fantastic tool to allow you to be able to perform trending analysis and look at this and say, hey, you know what, we are increasing by about 5 or 10% per month, and we only have 6 servers. By this time, I can say we're going to need more capacity, and so we can get out in front of that and be able to address that. Not only can I filter this particular report by server, but I can also actually drill down and identify specific users. So this is really helpful because I can look and see, how busy a specific user is over time, should I decide to drill down that far. Next, I want to go to the client distribution report. And this report is fantastic because, again, in a multi-server deployment, we want to ensure that our connections are evenly distributed. Most often, you may have an active passive environment, in which case all of your connections are going to be on primary servers, and you wouldn't see any connections on secondary servers. But this is good in an active scenario to make sure you have even client distribution. And if you don't, you can address those. By the way, if you're using active and you expect to see all your connections on your primary data center, and for whatever reason connections are leaking over to the second data center, you would see that, and you would get an idea of how frequently that's happening. And so you can see, hey, on a regular basis, in active passive mode, I see 1 or 2% over on the passive servers. But now I'm seeing 20 and 30%. What would be the cause of that? Are there outages on the primary data center that are causing that? Maybe it's a problem with my health checks. Are my health checks failing? There's a lot of things that you can look at in this report that would help you from a load balancing client distribution perspective. And once again, we do have filters so that we can filter on date ranges, servers, and even individual users as well. We have information about how much usage these clients are using per connection, the number of users by their tunnel type. So in other words, I can get an idea for how evenly distributed my individual connections are. So if I'm using SSTP and IPv2, this will give me an idea for how often I'm using one or the other. Next is the connection detail pane. And this is going to be tremendously helpful for always-on VPN administrators who have to generate user activity reports. So for example, let's say, InfoSec comes to you and says, hey, we have a potential breach. There was an event we're investigating, and we need to know where Joe user went around this particular time or date range, and we want to know where they connected from and what resources they accessed. Doing that on one server, maybe two servers, not terrible. Doing it on a handful of servers or dozens of servers or dozens and dozens of servers is quite tedious and time consuming. At the end of the day, this one's going to be really, really helpful if you have to do this with any regularity at all. And in this scenario, let's say, for example, I get a request to find some information on a specific user. So I'll select this test user here, Rick Deckard, and I'm going to choose my time zone. And I've been asked to find them in October of 2023, roughly, right? So let's see if I can make that nice and even. And there we go. Awesome. And they didn't connect at that time. So let me expand that. Okay, great. So we found some connections. I want to actually see this user on more than one server. There we go. Okay, great. So they've made connections across multiple servers during this time frame. Okay. So what I can do then, so I've drilled down per the user, and now I want to find out, individual servers. I could actually filter them here, or I could just simply expand these and drill down, and you'll see that these connections are then filtered. There was a lot of connections to VPN3 during this date range, and I can highlight this, which gives me an overview, right? So this tells me all of the client connections, but I can also drill down to an individual connection, and then you see that reports change and give me the very specific information on what they were connecting through. So this would have been the, and of course, this is a misconfiguration of my lab. This should be a public IP address. These should be public IP addresses, but these are the resources. These would be the client's original source IP address. And these are the resources that the user accessed. And by the way, you'll notice that IPv6 is fully supported here. So we have IPv6 addresses that are represented as well. So if you're using IPv6, you're in good shape. The last thing I want to check in on here or demonstrate is the data flow tab. So the data flow tab gives us an idea of how much traffic is flowing into and out of the server. And this is really helpful. It can be helpful in scenarios in which you're trying to assess some data loss potentially. So there are scenarios, I've been involved in them personally, where you may be called upon to find out, how much data is, this user pulling down, or it might also just be used as a general overview to find anomalous behavior. In other words, I can look and see, well, let me clear this field here. So I can see all of these connections, but then I can drill down by user and find out, well, what did this particular device do or this specific user? And then I can find out information. I can say, well, that's interesting. On specific date and time, they pulled down 40 gig. And then I would use that in the user activity reports to identify what resource they went to. And I say, oh, wow, they pulled down 40 gig from a SQL server from marketing. Why did they do that? They're not in marketing. Those types of things, or those types of scenarios, are what you would use these specific reports. And that's where I think you might find them useful in your organization. With that, that's kind of my quick and dirty tour of the product. I want to turn it back over to Leo. Leo, take it away.
Thank you very much for that. So, kind of after all of that, actually, there was a question that just came in around, is there an easy way to filter against user tunnel versus device tunnel connections?
Good question, and the answer would be sort of yes. So let me share my screen again here, Leo. So where is it? There we go. So as we are looking at connection, connection details, let's see here. What you will find is there isn't anything specific to user or device. However, when you're looking through this list, you'll notice that users are represented by a UPN or user principal name, or it looks like an email address. And then devices have a host name or FQDN. So that's an interesting. That is an interesting requirement, though, Leo. That's something maybe we want to consider. Maybe a checkbox for that, or is there an option to do that I'm not aware of?
So you can actually see that we're capturing the information on that in the top left table. So in theory, it wouldn't be particularly hard to do. So I'll certainly go and add that to our roadmap, as I can certainly see some interesting use cases for that.
Fantastic. Yeah, that would be excellent. And that's the beauty of this is that this is a new product. So
yep.
we've been working this for a year and a half, almost probably. Once we get this into the wild, we're going to get all kinds of feedback, and the light bulbs are going to start going off. And like, oh yeah, that'd be great. So absolutely, let us know what you think. So that's fantastic.
And yeah, we're a very feedback-driven development team. So ultimately, especially with things like that, where the data's already there, it's simply add another filter.
Yep.
There's no reason why not to.
So yeah, outstanding.
So I'll just.
So I guess to answer that question, not currently, but yes, it's coming. So
yeah,
or it will.
At the moment, you could potentially filter if you're using SSTP for your end users. You could potentially filter or look at the stats that way as well. But
yeah.
So to just kind of try and summarize some of the key benefits of the solution, it's ultimately we're trying to provide an improved administrative experience, so by providing all of the data that you need to evaluate your environment as a single set of dashboards, rather than needing the super fancy scripts that Richard has kind of created for his own uses, or the usual manual slog of going through all of your different servers individually. We're also trying to bring together the health and the performance side of things and combine that with the connection data. So like the classic example is, what is the total, like what's the maximum concurrent users that have been using the solution, and also then following on from that was, how did that impact performance? Because at the moment at 5 o'clock on a Friday night, the servers are doing absolutely nothing because everyone's gone home. But what about last Tuesday when we had the highest peak load on our servers ever? It's that kind of both combining the historical modeling with the end users that most organizations really struggle with on that side of things. Then, as Richard said, being able to query that historical data, especially from a data security or a potential malicious attack perspective, that can be a huge positive to either the server or the security teams. And ultimately, it allows you to go back to the business and kind of have demonstrable proof that the your AOVPN environment is fit for purpose, and is kind of taking on specific, like, so you can go back to the business. So yeah, last week we had 2,000 unique connections and we didn't have a problem. So don't worry about it. We're here. We've got you. We're a business enabler, and you can start having that positive those positive conversations with the rest of the business, rather than just being seen as that cost center or the place where everything always goes wrong.
Excellent point. You're right. And I think we talked about this in the first session, is that this is a tool that not only allows you to be proactive about monitoring and maintaining the environment, but you can demonstrate that to upper management, the executive team, and say, hey, listen, not only did we implement this solution, but we didn't just kick it down the road. We're actively monitoring and proactively making changes to, address capacity and resource utilization. And as we talked about previously, we may be able to look at a report and say, wow, we deployed 6 servers and wow, they're so underutilized. We could probably turn off a couple, save some resources. Oftentimes, where these are virtual machines running in shared environment, if we can return some resources back to the pool, it's better for the organization. And without that tool, we might have just run this and said, hey, we want to just be better safe than sorry. But this is a tool that does that. It, again, demonstrates value of the solution, and the fact that you're looking after it actively and proactively to ensure that you have enough capacity and that you're monitoring for anything that could prevent an outage. Because as we all know, remote access is no longer a nice to have. It is a critical service in all enterprises today. So
lovely. So on to possibly my favorite part of these webinars, which is any questions. And we've got quite an interesting one that's just come in around, so how can we leverage this solution to monitor status of servers, especially following patching or other maintenance? So because of the kind of the delays and latencies and things, how can we get a proactive view on this? And there's actually some interesting things that you can do with this. So one of the things we didn't actually mention earlier, when you're limited to those 8 automatic refreshes, is the fact that you can actually still override that with manual refreshes. So if you're doing a specific maintenance window, provided you've got sufficient access to the report, you can actually then trigger a refresh on that underlying data model. And depending on the size of your data, it can take a minute or 2 to kind of complete that refresh. But there are ways to trigger those at the non-scheduled times. The other thing to mention is the agent. Now, by default, it is configured to run every hour. However, the first thing it does when it starts to start up is that it will do a refresh of its data set at that point. And you can also trigger, and therefore you can actually also trigger a data refresh at any point simply by restarting the service. But if it's rebooting anyway, then it'll be kind of refreshing itself after the reboot anyway as the services start up.
Good to know. Outstanding. Does anybody else have any other questions at all?
Yeah, please feel free to add some more questions into the chat.
I'm trying to think of some of the more interesting ones we had on the first session. So I know we had quite a few questions on the first session. When if we could.
Yes, I had. Probably don't want to do
that. We did talk about licensing, of course. We did explain that this is not a real-time solution, and not even really a near real-time solution. So be mindful of that. It's not as if you can go and say, "Hey, I need to know who's connected right now," and you're going to see that. You're still going to have to visit the management console on your existing server to see who's connected, like currently. So again, just keep that in mind. I just set the expectation level. It is not real time. It is not near real time. That it is kind of snapshots or points in times as well.
Yeah. So we did have a question around whether this was suitable for on-premises environments.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, we actually touched upon this on the earlier session. This is a solution that is suitable for Windows Server RAS, right? Routing and Remote Access Service. Where you choose to deploy the RAS server, we don't really care. So you could deploy that on premises, you could deploy it in Azure, you can deploy it in AWS or GCP or anybody else you want. This is a routing and remote access solution. What it is not is a solution that works with Cisco or Checkpoint or Palo Alto or something to that effect. So it is designed for Windows Server RAS. It does not work with, for example, Azure VPN Gateway or Azure Virtual WAN. It is designed for Windows Server RAS, and wherever you want to install that is fine. It just needs to have access to the internet. The VPN server would need to have access outbound to the internet to reach Azure, so the agent can upload that data to your Azure storage account.
So we've had another question come in around, is there anything on the roadmap around error reporting or collection for suboptimal client behavior reporting?
Oh, good question. I think we had some conversations, you and I, early in the early days about what you could do with a client-side agent. So this is a server-side agent, though. I think that's more of a question for DBC, right?
Yeah, so in terms of proactive monitoring or proactive alerting, I should say, because we're built on top of the Power BI framework, there's nothing that we can kind of do natively on that side. We had a lot of requests for that on the previous call, so it's certainly something we're going to take a look at, but can't promise anything at this point.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the error reporting and collection actually on the server side, there's potentially stuff that we can do, because ultimately we are running our own agent on this. So anything that we can kind of pull out of the server side, we can then potentially upload that. It's then really a question of kind of what data is valuable there, and how we can present that in a meaningful and useful way to customers. So if you've got any thoughts on specifics around that stuff, we would absolutely love to hear that.
Fantastic.
We've also had another question in around, are there any limitations around running it through a proxy server? So one of the things that we identified as part of the private preview that we were in was proxy server support. We believe that that is fully functional, but if you do have any issues with it, we can certainly look at, we're not, put it this way, we're not expecting there to be any limitations with proxy servers.
Good to know.
And finally, we've got one around, can we get a price estimate so that you can discuss that with management? So we don't have the pricing available on this call, but if you do respond to the email you'll get, I think it's tomorrow, if you just let us know the number of RS servers that you're looking to license, then we can certainly have a offline conversation about it.
Outstanding. And by the way, shameless self-promotion here. I am, I think, the only U.S. reseller for Power On platform. So if you're here in the United States and you'd like to purchase licenses, hit me up.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Any questions at all? Huh?
Don't think so. So in which
Very
case, thank you very much for your for listening. If you do want to continue the conversation, then please do respond back to the email that you'll get tomorrow, or reach out to, I think it's info@poweronplatforms.com, or to, is it rich@richardhicks.com, isn't it?
Yep. Absolutely.
Thank you very much for joining.
Thanks for having me, Leo. I appreciate it, and the entire Power On team. Thanks everybody for joining the call today, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you all.
Cheers.